Hey everybody, back again, Physical Resilience Outlook with Nick and Dan. And today we're going to talk about VO2 Max. I think sometimes one of the more misunderstood ones, if you went to somebody in the street and said, "Hey, what's your VO2 Max?" I think very few of them, unless they have a science degree, would even know what that is. And I would unfortunately argue that if you ask the many physical therapists, they might not know what it is. So we're going to clear that up right away. This movement that we picked is one of the most researched, if not the most researched. Would you guys agree with that?
It's got to
Yeah,
be up there for
it's
sure.
up there in terms of it being pretty undeniable that if your VO2 max is higher, you're just going to live longer. So let's say, Dan, you went up to somebody in the street and you asked them what their VO2 max was. They had no idea what it is. How would you describe their VO2 max?
It's basically, I mean, you could say like aerobic fitness as like a basic term, but it's how much blood and oxygen your body can utilize at like a an all-out effort.
Yeah, so it's a measure of how well your body processes oxygen. Would anybody disagree with me on that? Okay, so if you are in very good shape, let's take Olympic cross country skiers, cyclists. Those guys are going to have a very high VO2 max. If you have a very low VO2 max, then Nick, what would that indicate?
You can't use that well, and you're probably huffing and puffing just walking around on a daily basis.
Yeah, there's actually measurements of like how what your VO2 max should be if you can go up and down a flight of stairs and you don't lose your breath, which might seem kind of silly to some people, but we have some patients certainly as you get older, if you're not working on this, then that can be a real issue. So it is really almost undeniable that if you have a low VO2 max, your chance of all-cause mortality is going to go up. So if you haven't heard that term before, just like anything that can kill you, systemic disease, a bear attacking you from out of the woods. I don't think they really include that in the research, but all-cause mortality is a term you'll commonly see if you start to research this more, because a lot of the tests that we are selecting have been researched and shown, have been proven to be valid in terms of predicting how successfully you age. And some of the tests that we have don't have much research behind it, and that's what we're trying to do. So, a description of the test. Dan, you've actually done the test fairly recently, so I think we pick you for a description of a VO2 max test. What does it look like?
So you can do a formal test in like an exercise lab, and for that, they're gonna hook you up to like a face mask that covers the nose and the mouth, and that's gonna measure like how much oxygen and carbon dioxide you're breathing, and then you have to do like a graded treadmill test. So they start to increase the speed, increase the incline, and basically take you to failure till you can't go anymore, and that's how they get your VO2 max. Um, for the purposes of our study, we're just going to use the Cooper test, which is just how far you can run, walk in 12 minutes, and you can use that as an estimate of your VO2 max. There's also the Rockport test, which is strictly for walking. So if you have someone who can't run, they can do this test. Basically, just have to walk a mile as fast as they can, and then they get their like heart rate, and you put in your age as well, and then there's a formula to estimate it from that.
So one of our goals of this whole thing is to make it very accessible to people. So we shouldn't have people being like, I can't do that. So there are very few people that are listening to this right now that will probably ever get a true VO2 max test in a lab. That's okay. There are corollaries to that. And we're actually even studying, like Dan has done. Have you done all three, Dan, or just two?
Just two.
Okay. And I don't know if I'm putting you on the spot. Do you remember how close those numbers were? So Dan has an actual VO2 max tested in a lab, and then he did the corollary of a VO2 max test, which doesn't require a lab. And how close were they?
It was fairly close. Like it was within 10 points, I want to say.
Yeah.
So
And
not perfect, but
yeah.
decent.
And the takeaway that we want to tell you is that, oh, I can't really get into a lab and do it. It doesn't matter which mode you use, just that you measure your improvement using the same mode, if that makes sense. So obviously, we're going to, if you're having pain or any with this one, significant cardiovascular issues or just not feeling great, then that's definitely something you're going to stop on if you're doing any of these tests. But I mean, common errors in execution of this movement. I mean, they're pretty straightforward tests. If you're in a lab, someone's going to be monitoring you and help you out with that. So it's pretty hard to screw that up. unless you just absolutely fail or the tester stops the test. They will stop the test occasionally if things aren't looking good. But um, it's really just kind of following the guidelines of the test, which if you're listening to this, you're going to have access to that. Um, in terms of norms or what we're looking at for scoring, Nick, do you want to go over that?
So where we're kind of starting with here, uh, for the earlier ages, like 20 to 39 here, uh, basically women and men aren't that far off. Like for men, it's 55. And this is a score. Does it stop at 100? I actually don't know. I never looked into that.
I have to look at there are records for
I know
VO2
people have hit
max
like
height.
upper
Yeah.
90s, but I think 100, I actually just assume is perfect, but I don't know that that could ever happen or if you can get over 100.
Yeah.
Um, that being said, so we're just looking at a number here that goes up to approximately 100. And if you're doing really pretty well, 55 for men, 50 and over for women is really pretty good. And then that kind of just goes down uh, decade by decade. I mean, the ages of 40 to 59, it goes to 51 for men, 47 for women, 60 to 79, 45 for men, 39 for women. So you kind of see, and then it goes, if or 80 plus, it goes to 35 and 30. Uh, so even just maintaining it, right? Like you can see there's not a huge drop off. Like it takes 60 plus years, right, to have a 20% drop off in the score. So you can really maintain this for quite a while.
Yep. And the point is you want to try to improve on this score, whatever that is. In general, people age 20 to 39, barring any kind of like systemic issues or orthopedic issues, their number is higher because they should just really roll out of bed and be able to get a good score. As you get older and there's more time on your clock, and you typically are not doing things that will support a high VO2 max. Typically younger people, even if they're not involved in sports or anything like that, they were involved in sports as a kid, and they're kind of leaning on that previous experience of being in good shape. Another thing that you can say, well, VO2 max, I'm still not understanding it. It's basically how good a shape you're in. Like, can you run, walk, do basic activities without getting completely out of breath and having to rest because, not because of muscle fatigue or not because of the muscles getting sore, but more of you're kind of losing your lungs, if that's a familiar term for people. It's like I would go more, further, do it harder, except I'm just out of breath. That is a very general way to describe, if you have a high VO2 max, you're going to be able to do things for sustained periods of time with a high heart rate, and it's not that tough for you to do. And if you have to stop quickly as a result of doing physical activity, then you probably have a low VO2 max. So why is this important, Dan? We want to try to encourage people to have a high VO2 max. What for?
It's one of, like we've said, at least in the research, it's one of the best predictors of longevity and just how well you're going to function into old age. It is pretty much a linear relationship. So the better shape you're in, the better your life expectancy. Doesn't really have like a top limit on it. And it does decrease with age, like naturally. There's a big genetic component to VO2 max. Um, and typically after like age 30, it starts to decline like 1 to 2% a year, which doesn't sound like a lot, but starting at 30, by the time you're 80, it can be down 50%, especially if you're not training it.
Okay. And Nick, why do people tend to have this score go down? We said there's some of it is a bit age related, but why do people lose this as they age?
People don't move.
Oh.
It's this one is that simple. This doesn't have to be like some of the other ones where we've talked, oh, you're not holding this kind of weight, you're not doing these kind of movements. Here's just basic movement. Like the more you move around, and then at a higher, I'm going to say, respiratory output, cardiovascular output, uh, if you don't do anything that gets your breath, if you don't do anything that gets you breathing hard, this goes down.
Right. And negative consequences as you age if you lose this. We talked about that. It's just kind of you have a higher chance of dying from stuff. So being more active is really important. The thing I always think about is I remember when I was a kid and I worked with my dad, he had a very physical labor job. Like he's a dairy farmer, so he'd wake up and he would do mostly low level activity, not super high level activity, but he's doing low level activity all day long. Now, if he's carrying buckets of water or throwing hay or chasing a cow around, every once in a while, he's going to get his heart rate up, but he was doing that all the time, and the guy never got tired. And then now, as he's in his mid 70s, he's not doing that as much. I notice that when he comes to my house and we're working on stuff, I'll find him on the couch a lot more. And he's like, yep, just got to kind of take a break. He just runs out of air. Like it loses the physical capacity to do that because one, like what Dan was saying, as you age, naturally this is going to go down a little. But certainly if you start cutting out activity that got you to a high VO2 max, and you don't focus on improving it, then it's going to go down. So I don't think there's much explanation involved there. Equipment that you need to test varies. Everything from a lab, like we talked about, which again, most people that are listening to this are probably never going to do that. That's okay, as long as you're using some other measurement of it. So the measurements that we talked about are just your body and a flat surface and some measurement tools. You want to know how long you're going. If you're on a treadmill that's accurate, I've actually found this to be an issue that not all treadmills are accurate. Because I gave my parents an old treadmill and they've been working on this for a couple of years and it is completely wrong. Like the distances on it, when it says you go a mile, you did not go a mile. So you've got to make sure that your measurements are accurate. Best is just to get out on a track if you can. I mean, if you're paying taxes, there's probably a local high school track that you can be allowed to be on, and that's the best form of measurement because that's exact. And then you just need to be able to measure a couple other factors. So in one of the tests, you've got to be able to measure your heart rate. So it's pretty easy to learn how to do that. But the other measurement is just a stopwatch. You're trying to see how far you can go in 12 minutes. And you just kind of take that as a measurement of your VO2 max. So what your score means, I mean, we talked about this, the higher it is, the better. And there's no upper limit to the effectiveness of this. I remember when Dan showed me all the research and it's like, okay, what's kind of the minimum effective dose? And he's like, there really isn't one. Like the better you are at this, the better things are going to be for you. Now, I will say that the biggest jumps in improvement. So when you look at the research, if you guys take a look at this, it'll split it off by decades, and you'll have how do they split it up? They like good, better, best, but there's a couple more areas where it's like I think the top is elite or excellent. Is that what it
I
says,
think it was
Dan?
excellent.
Excellent. And then there's like kind of like middle ground. Like you're not really good, but you're not really terrible. The biggest improvements in terms of like predicting how long you're going to live come from going from the bottom part, like the bottom 25th percentile, the bottom 30th percentile to above the 50th percentile. And I think, for most people that haven't been moving, it can be a challenge to do that. But that's where you get the biggest jump. Going from like good to great actually doesn't improve your projected life length. It's the biggest gains are to go from people that are not good at all, which is most of the patients that we work with. Most of the patients that we see do not have a high VO2 max, but they can get around pretty easily and they can train it for sure. Going from like that bottom to mid like 20 to 30th percentile, which is most people hang out, up to above the 50th percentile is where the biggest gains are made. So the point of that is you don't need to go out and spend $3,000 on a bike and ride that around all the time. You don't need to go join a gym and, get on the treadmill all the time. You just need basic equipment, which is your body and a safe place to walk or run, and you can have everything you need to improve your VO2 max. So as you age, Dan, we talked about this, but here's our sales pitch for, hey, this is kind of important. Most people are out there. I don't know. I'm not a professional runner. My job doesn't really require that that I'm in good shape. But what is the sales pitch from you to be like, hey, this is something that you want to pay attention to?
It's just, yeah, really important. Like people talk about heart health, like exercise is probably better than any drug at improving that. And then if you want to do like your daily activities without getting out of breath, just going up a set of stairs, simple stuff like that. They don't have to be like regular exercisers, but if they just want to do everything around their house and not have to take breaks all the time, this is kind of the best predictor of that.
Yeah, Nick, what would you add to that?
Not much. I mean, it really just comes down to if you don't want to just be sucking wind all the time, right? And just be able to go to your mailbox, go to the store, go to just see your friends, whatever it is, like, yeah, that's the selling point to me is like just not being out of breath.
Yeah, I think if you're someone, no matter what age you are right now, just think of somebody that is older according to their driver's license, but they act a lot younger than they are. Usually that person is either extremely genetically gifted, which is rare, or they're doing something that they probably don't even know about and that their body's just used to doing that you are not. If you're feeling like, if you're in whatever decade you're in, if you're feeling like, man, I feel older than my driver's license says, I would argue that if you find someone that you're like, oh, I wish I was more like that, they're probably doing something. Maybe not, oh, I'm really working on my VO2 max. That's probably not what's going to come out of their mouth, but they're doing things that are improving their VO2 max. And I bet their VO2 max is pretty high, even if they don't test it. So I guess my sales pitch would be, if you don't want to feel old, I think a good place to start would be testing your VO2 max and then having some kind of intervention. So when you do the test with us, and you're going to get intervention. So Dan does the programming in order to improve your VO2 max. You're going to get some kind of intervention. If you work on that, you will feel a lot younger. And I don't think we're going to get a lot of opposition to that theory. So speaking of that, Dan, if someone has a low VO2 max, do the test. But if you're saying to yourself, yeah, if I go up and down the flight of stairs a couple times, I'm feeling it and I'm breathing pretty heavy. Or if I'm doing like physical activity, maybe that I don't do a ton, maybe I do like it's getting to the fall now. If I have to rake a lot of leaves and I'm doing like an upper extremity kind of workout, that will tire people out pretty quickly. And you're like, I should not be this winded doing this. Then you can definitely improve your VO2 max is probably something you need to work on. But Dan, if someone wanted to improve their VO2 max, what are some things that they can do?
So start with simple stuff if they're especially if they test low initially, just getting out for like simple walks. Could ride a bike if you're not a big walker or runner. If you have a stationary bike, and also it doesn't have to be high intensity. It's more about building up the time. Like you want to go a good at least 20 minutes, I would say, and you could go up to 60 minutes, but it's not even like a bad effort. Like you should be able to maintain a conversation during that time. So that's going to build up like that aerobic base and improve your VO2 max. Once you get better, you can start throwing in like interval training and the more traditional type of cardio people tend to think of, but you don't even need that in the beginning.
Yeah, if you read research on this, you're going to see a lot of increasing the amount of time that you spend in zone two. Zone two is described as you're doing something, some kind of physical activity, no matter what it is, rowing, yard work, even weightlifting, something where you could have a conversation with somebody, but you probably don't want it to be a really long conversation. I know that's a very subjective description of what it is. There's other descriptions of taking your heart rate, but everybody's max heart rate can vary. So just think about that, spending more time there as possible and as much time there as possible. And Dan, I think the guidelines that you have suggested is how many minutes per week do you want to be in like zone two if you want to improve your VO2 max?
You could start with as little as like 30 to 60. And then, yeah, getting up towards like a really good dose is probably closer to 120 minutes to 150 minutes a week. I think that's the like activity guidelines.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you're someone who, hey, I really work on my VO2 max, I do a lot of cardiovascular activity, but I really can't get my parents into it. Like try getting a 70-year-old into like working on their VO2 max. Not that easy. The walking is good, but incline walking can be really helpful. So that's the protocol that I put my parents on. I just have them incline walk. You go home right now. If you've not been working on your VO2 max or working on your cardiovascular health, if you go home and put a treadmill on a 10 or 15 mile or 10 or 15 degree incline and you go for a walk, just like a 2.5 to 3.5 miles per hour, you're going to be sucking wind. You're going to be sweating a lot. So you obviously have to grade that. Like, don't start them off at like 15 degrees if they haven't done that before. But that's an easy way you're someone that doesn't like running and just likes to walk, but feeling like, yeah, I wish I could get my heart rate up a little bit higher. If you put it on an incline, your heart rate's going to get higher. Anything to add to that, Nick?
No, that's a huge one. Inclines, declines are all good and actually probably preferred than just flat surfaces a lot of times. Like, yes, test it on a flat surface, but that undulating movement also just now is not just VO2 max. You're going to get a lot of other components for just balance and strength in there too.
Right. All right. We'll wrap it up there. Hopefully you're out there working on your VO2 max. And yeah, as always, we're helping you have better health through better understanding. Talk to you guys soon.